Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Annesley Markdale. We hope you thoroughly enjoy tonight's performance, and to make your enjoyment complete, we strongly recommend you have a seat cushion from our friendly front-of-house staff. There are 2 wheelchair-accessible washrooms on this. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, 6 Nations of the Grand River, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Wyandot peoples, on whose traditional territories we gather, and whose ancestors signed treaties with our ancestors. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land, and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples.
Well, thank you, voiceover lady. Very nicely done. And welcome everybody to our speaker series, the first one for this fall. I will be introducing our guest tonight. His name is Robert Burcher, and he is a well-known detective from nearby Slabtown. Oh, sure, yeah. He's a renowned author and a wilderness explorer, but he has the determination of Sherlock Holmes to hone into a mysterious detail that he may have found on a rock, and he follows that lead to a moment of discovery, sometimes years later. Let me give you an example. Touring the Peterborough petroglyphs, Robert came upon a sailing vessel carved into a rock. He had a hunch that this carving was of a leather boat built by ancient Celtic mariners who came to our continent hundreds of years before the Vikings. So, on a hunch, he traveled to where the source of these stories were strongest, and he interviewed museum curators, Celtic storytellers, police investigators, until he finally pulled all these loose threads together to weave a story that is really beyond compelling in his book, The Leather Boat. Now, these observational skills, these sleuthing skills, were developed as a student at the Banff School of Fine Arts, where Robert was taught that seeing is more important than looking. So it's no surprise then that his concept has led him to his new passion, archaeomythology. And that is a fascinating, relatively new discipline. It's focusing on archaeological research, but it also integrates the social structures of past societies along with their beliefs and their rituals. Now, on one of his hikes in the Beaver Valley near Epping, Robert came across an old plaque, quite deteriorated, covered in graffiti. The Sherlock Holmes in him rose again, and he embarked on a 30-year research odyssey to unravel his most famous of cold cases, the mystery of John Muir. And here to tell us how his particular labor of love unfolded and was resolved, and then turned into a book called My Summer of Glorious Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, the diligent, humorous, and inspiring Robert Burcher.
Sir, that's good. Just stand up for a minute. I just want to do a sound check. How are we doing, Tim? We're having some problems with the sound.
Go for the mic up there. You can use mine.
Okay, we're done.
Sorry, folks. What I wanted to say is I didn't know that I had a twin in this world. Look at this guy. Okay, so, and after I heard that introduction, I'm ready to have him hired for my team.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll use that mic. Nobody needs a mic here, but this is being live streamed to people outside, so that's why we're putting a mic on Robert tonight.
Okay, are we there, Tim? Good. Okay. It's nice to get those little technical glitches out of the way right away, okay, and then nothing else is going to interrupt. I have to say it's a great honor to be in this church. I'm a fifth generation Irwin, and if you don't know, that this church started in the Irwin farmhouse down on Highway 10 back in 1854. So I have a lot of angels up there watching me and hoping that I do a good job tonight. Thank you for coming and for your interest in John Muir. I'm very interested in this character who I met sort of secondhand when I was going to school in Banff, because I was there for photography, and there's a guy by the name of Ansel Adams who did a lot of work in Yosemite National Park. But he always referred to the fact that this guy John Muir was the man that really made Yosemite what it is. So as you were saying, when I found this plaque in the valley, it was like, oh my God, John Muir in this area? That's way too much. So this is a unique opportunity tonight because we're live streaming it out to the world. So I put the word out to the Muir internet, and there's people who have responded, and from the USA, Scotland, Ireland, Australia, and Europe, all people who know the importance of John Muir in the world, even though we don't really know so well here in Grey County, who this man was. Also, some really specific connections. John Muir was born in Dunbar, and the Dunbar Birthplace Museum is dialing in tonight, or when it gets recorded. Friends of John Muir in Wisconsin are dialing in, and Sierra Club connections in California are all part of this. But the last person I really want to honor is a woman by the name of C.J. Bile, who I've yet to meet. We've just talked by internet. She's a professor in a college in Utah who teaches a course about John Muir and John Muir in Canada. So I've sent her my book, and so I think that it might become one of those reading list books that you have to read within her course, which makes me really quite proud because I'm not a historian. I never finished university, and if they're using my book as a textbook, that's weird. So anyhow, what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to do a few things. It's 3 parts tonight. I'm going to come over and talk to this. I'm just thinking what's happening because I don't have the sound. Nobody's going to hear that out there, but I'm still going to talk to you folk about this. This to give a context of where John Muir was and in a timeline. And then we go to a video that we created during COVID times so that you could have a hike down into Trout Hollow, which is where John Muir lived in Meaford. And then I go to a slideshow about my little adventure with a piece of history that fills in where John Muir was.
Can I suggest you move that over there so you can use it?
Nice try, but the cameras are on this end.
Okay, I'll see.
So this is what I do a lot when I have a history project over here on this side. As I lay things out, so you've got 200 years of history of the 1800s going back into the beginning of the 1700s. And the reason why I want to do this is that all of us here have had some kind of input from people who have moved here from Ireland or from Scotland. The quick story is that the steam engine was invented in 1781. It created a revolution in industries. The Industrial Revolution was really doing a lot in the mills, the woolen mills of Scotland. They started to kick people off the land so they could have more sheep on the land. And my Irish grandmother from here married a Scottish man, and his family had been rooted off the land in Scotland during the clearances. The Irish side of my family came out of the potato famine at this point, right after 1845, and you can sort of see the Irish. So here in Grey County, we have 2 layers of, would we say, input of various people. That's the background on this, but this is where John Muir was born, 1838, and this is the point where his family moved to the USA because they were not doing well in Scotland. John Muir went off to university in these few years right here, from 1860 to 1863. The Civil War, the USA Civil War, is starting here, and since he was a Scottish citizen, his mother said to the 2 boys, there was Danny and then John, You guys should get up to Canada because that is a safe place and we don't want you dying in the Civil War. So this is where John Muir left Wisconsin and came to Meaford for the 2 years of 1864 to 1866. You'll see this in the movie, but the mill burned down, so he left, the war was over, went back to the States, went to Yosemite in 1870, spent a lot of time in California, did trips to Alaska, he did more world travels off to Asia. In 1892, he started the Sierra Club in the United States, which is still going strong. It's got close to 4 million members now. And then there was a pivotal thing that happened here in 1903. Teddy Roosevelt came to visit him in California, and the two of them went up to Yosemite on a camping trip, and they came up with the idea of a national park. So that is where the concept of national park came from in 1903, and Muir dies in 1914. So that's your quick history of what was going on in the world at the time. So I'm just going to take this down so you can see up there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to run the movie, and this is about a 20-minute movie about Trout Hollow and John Muir. So this is the Beaver Valley in central Ontario, and my name is Robert Burcher, and this is where I live. On a hike that I was doing just below here back in 1991, I ended up coming into this little conservation area, and I saw a plaque that was abandoned and graffitied and hidden behind this planted pine forest over here. And I thought that was a very strange place to put a plaque. When I read the plaque, I was stunned to find that it was about John Muir, and that John Muir had lived in this area for 2 years back in the 1860s during the American Civil War. But from seeing that plaque and finding out that he was in this area, I was determined to find out exactly where he lived and exactly where he worked, and that led to the whole story about Trout Hollow. The other interesting thing is that the Bruce Trail comes right through here, and they talk about it on the plaque, and the Bruce Trail goes that direction for hundreds of kilometers up to the top of Tobermory, and it goes that way down to Niagara Falls for another several hundred kilometers. So this plaque is on that very vital recreational Bruce Trail. So it's very interesting that John Muir, who hiked and walked everywhere, I'm sorry, he never hiked, he sauntered, that this plaque is now on the Bruce Trail.
John Muir sauntered throughout North America in his lifetime. Through his travels, he became a friend of presidents, the father of the National Park System, and co-founder of the Sierra Club. He lived in Ontario from 1864 to 1866. Meaford, Ontario, on the southern shores of Georgian Bay, had a strict Presbyterian congregation that Muir and fellow Scots who had settled here previously followed religiously. This connection soon led to work with local entrepreneurs, the Trouts, at a sawmill where his skills as a tinkerer and inventor helped improve productivity. Here is the often untold story of Muir's life in Canada. In his late 20s and looking for relief from the American Civil War, he joined his brother Dan in Ontario. This is the path to access Trout Hollow from the west. John Muir more than likely used this access frequently. John Muir can be described as a man of lots of walking and little talking.
The big mystery around this whole John Muir story here in Trout Hollow was, where was the cabin site? On a July day in 1998, there was a hike through this area to explain the John Muir story, and a woman from the University of Alberta was here, and she was an expert on John Muir. So she and I were running through the woods here trying to figure out where could a cabin have been. So we ended up on this little plateau here, and I sort of wandered over to the edge here, and there's a groundhog hole right here, and in the debris around the edge of the groundhog hole was a tiny little piece of really old looking ceramics. So I said, Connie, this might be a real clue, because this doesn't look like it's recent stuff from a party. So there's an image of it right here on the plaque of this little shard that we have. And the interesting thing is, nobody really knew what this design was or how old it was. So I spent a whole next winter going to different museums and archives trying to figure out this. Finally found out that it's Staffordshire pottery, dates to the 1850s, and this actual scene here is a volcano in Italy, in Sicily, Mount Etna, exploding. And when it exploded, it wiped out this town of Catania, which is down in front here. One of the interesting things at this cabin site is this is the edge of the plateau, and the cabin would have been up to my right. As the seasons happen, rain washes soil down slowly, and you can usually find artifacts along this edge dating back to the time period of the 1860s. And in fact, we're lucky today. On the very first look, there it is, a little tiny piece of the ceramics. Now that I'm taking a second look at this little piece of ceramic, I realize it's not a teacup or a cup, but it's probably from a smoking pipe. It's so thin, and its roundness would indicate that it was for smoking, and they had little tiny pipes for their tobacco. Cigarettes didn't come along too much later, but pipes were very prevalent in that time period. One of the things that happened after we found the pottery shard and indicated this would be most likely the cabin site, one of the members of our group wandered into the woods here, and he saw these little pieces of white material, and he picked one up, and he realized that this was not natural. It was actually mortar, because you can crunch it with your fingers, and it's something you can't really do with natural stones. And so this indicated that either there'd been a fireplace here or a pad underneath a stove. So if that was the case, then this would have been the center of the cabin. Over the years, I've brought many, many people into this site to see Trout Hollow. And the people that are truly John Muir fans, when they get to this place, which we tell them exactly is the cabin site where John Muir lived and slept, people either get down on their knees because it's a holy ground. Some people cry. They look up at the trees around and go, oh my God, this is so amazing. And then if you listen, you can hear the river just below here. And that's what John Muir would have heard as he went to sleep every night. He lived and breathed that river sound. And I'll take you over here to the edge. It's all overgrown now, but you can see through the trees exactly what he would have seen.
This is the edge of the plateau where the cabin site was. It's right behind me. But this is the view that John Muir would have seen of the river as it flowed below the little hill that the cabin sat upon. And the river's flowing very nicely now, so that's what he would have seen, that's what he would have heard. This is an image that John Muir sketched in summer of 1865, the second summer he was here. And it shows the cabin that he lived in. He'd sent this image home to his family so that they had a sense of, you know, what his house home looked like. So I'm holding this in the exact direction that it appeared. So this would have been the south sunny side of the house. So this is the trail through Trout Hollow, but the interesting thing is right here in front of us was the very first piece of the area that was designated or discovered as part of this historic site. This is the actual dam, and you can actually see the flat surface across the top. I'm going to walk around up through the notch where the flume would have come out and show you where the top of the dam was. Right now I'm standing on the dam. Right behind would have been the mill pond. And through the trees up there, you can see how flat it is. So this would have been stone and earth that had been sucked out of the big hillside up there. The river is off to my right over here, which is east. And one of the things we discovered at one point is that the dam did not go all the way across the river. It was just a little containment facility on the side of the river, and there was a little stream that came in that filled the mill pond. And then the water was taken out of the flume, or through the gap there, the flume, out down to the mill. So if you don't know what a flume is, it's basically a big ditch made out of wood. A trough would be a better term, carrying the water from the top of the pond here out 10 or 12 feet in the air to hit the top of the big water wheel, which would power the mill. There was a bit of a groove here in the dam, so we know this is exactly where that trough of water would go. And the water would come down like over my head here in this trough to down where the edge of the mill is here, and I'll just go by here so you can see. So this is one wall of the mill, and this is the side of the mill going down there. So the water would have come through from the dam up there in this raised trough, and it would fall onto a big wheel right here. And so it would be a giant wheel like this turning with the water falling onto it. And in the center of that wheel would be an axle going inside, which would be then geared to all of the other machines that are working in there, whether it was saws or lathes and various kind of woodworking machinery. So one wheel did it all. One of the difficulties here in Trout Hollow is to actually look and find where the mill was. I'm kneeling right now on the foundation of the mill. There's a set of stones here, and they really show up once you clear away all the sticks and the branches and all the leaves that have come down over the years. And as I get up to do some raking, you'll start to see more rocks appearing here. And what I can see is that over time, the wall has tumbled down a little bit. For instance, here is a loose rock, which most likely would have been probably up here, you know, creating a square corner or something like that. And through the trees up there, about 30 meters, I can see where the cabin site used to be. The sun's shining on it today. And down here about, maybe 15 meters away is the actual foundation site of the mill. On the night that the mill caught fire, it was a major blizzard that was happening on February the 21st, 1866. This map sort of shows the layout, cabin here, sawmill there, so in a straight line right through here. In the wintertime, the winds just howl through here, and they get forced in by the big cliffs, hills on each side, so it really accelerates the wind. So it's quite easy to believe that sparks would fly that far. And when they woke up in the middle of night, they could see the fire reflected across this mill pond right here, and they knew this was big trouble. This mill was a two-story mill. Upstairs is where they were storing the rake handles, which were used in agricultural production. There was 30,000 of these handles in the second story of the mill. The sparks from the cabin blew through and started the mill on fire. So that was the end of John Muir's time here. John Muir left from this site to go back to the United States because the Civil War was over by then, and his home was there, so he went back to rebuild his fortune in America.
A year after the sawmill fire in Trout Hollow, Muir found himself in the Midwestern city of Indianapolis. There, in a carriage parts shop, he was blinded in one eye by a file as he tried to loosen a leather drive strap from some machinery. Both of his eyes were covered to limit light, and he was forced to face the thought the damage might be permanent. Did he wonder if he would ever appreciate snowy days the same again? Did his deep belief in religion play a role in focusing his mind to see God's creations more completely? Did he miss the flowers, the wildlife? Did he wonder if his interest in nature and botany were more important than a business career? Did he remember the grief of a fiery winter night? Did he look to the heavens in his mind and pray for his sight to return? We will never know for sure, but we do know certainly that he became the first advocate for saving our environment. We do know he is revered here in North America as well as his homeland of Scotland. John Muir, like most people, was not perfect, but he is special. Today, more than ever, John Muir is considered the father of environmentalism. Lives that influence others often develop from a series of events. We are left to wonder if John Muir's thoughts were influenced by his painful and frightening eye injury. Did the following darkness leave him time to assess the importance of what he had seen and categorized in Canada? Was he led to the conclusion that Darwin and Humboldt held a higher light for him to follow out of the dark?
Okay, thanks for that. We had lots of fun making that. It was during COVID times, so it was a project that came out of all that horrible time. Okay, I'm just going to start my little timer here. Actually, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so what we're doing now is when we did all the research on John Muir, discovered that there was 2 years that was missing in the life of John Muir if you read any of the history books. And that was the time that he was here in Canada. But the bigger story was, how did he get from Wisconsin to Meaford in that spring of 1864? So I worked on that for 10 years. Every time I drove to Toronto, I would think, how did he get from a place called Bradford to Meaford, trying to link up all little Scottish villages? And that was sort of launched in 2015 when I was asked to do a talk about national parks. And so what you're going to see here is this little talk about the work where I followed John Muir's path around Ontario in the summer of 1864. So that's a picture of John Muir taken just after he had left this area. So, you know, he's young and bearded, and he had the world, had his, just gone a little too far there. Yeah, so John Muir, we never knew had blue eyes because we always just saw black and white photos. But sometime recently, somebody in England figured this out, and they've colorized him to be like this. I was in Wisconsin back in 2016, and there was a whole 100th anniversary of the national parks, and this young man was dressed up as John Muir, trying to talk about, you know, what was it like for this man to be in Wisconsin at that time. And from there, John Muir left to go out, heading into the great northern place called Canada. And this is a picture that he drew of himself during that summer of 1864. And by the way, when he talks about my summer of glorious freedom, that's his expression, not my expression. Trout Hollow, as it looks now, this is a spring shot. You can just sort of see the trees in the back just starting to leaf out. And I don't know if you can read that, but well, you can read it better than I can. We live in a retired and romantic hollow. Our tall, tall forest trees are now alive, and the mingled ocean of blossom and leaves wave and curl and rise in rounded swells, further and further away. Freshness and beauty are everywhere. Flowers are born every hour. Living sunlight is poured over all, and everything and creature is glad. Our world is indeed a beautiful one. So that was written in May, just as spring was coming to Trout Hollow. You've seen the images of the cabin site in Trout Hollow. The green arrow shows exactly where the site is at that little plateau. And the river was flowing below, and that's a south-facing hillside. So it was just a gorgeous place to have a little cabin. And then this is another view of Trout Hollow taken in October, and you can sort of see the leaves changing, and this was what John Muir would have experienced back in those days, 150 years ago. I go into the area quite often in the spring because of the flowers that are blooming there. Nobody has been down in that area doing any construction or farming or logging since 1866, so it's really rewilded, as they say. And you've seen this picture. This was one of the major clues as how we found where to look for the cabin site. Was this picture or drawing that John Muir had done, and that was in 1865. So he had sent this home to his family so they could see sort of what he was living in. And this is the kind of mill that he would have been working in, a very primitive place, but you see one big wheel, the mill pond above. This was actually a painting done, if you know where the Dune Pioneer Village is, down in Kitchener. This was the Dune Mill. I mentioned that there was a group of letters found donated to the museum in Meaford, and this is one of them. And after John Muir left Meaford, he was in Indianapolis, so this is a letter that he's written back, and I'm just going to come around here to read a little bit of it. Dear friend Duncan Sterling, I just feel like sitting down on this hot Sabbath afternoon on this hillside among the maple trees and asking you all about your health and feelings and hopes with friendly something or other and an eager desire for your welfare. And it goes on and on. One of the things you find in reading these letters from the 1800s, how flowery the language was. But these letters are in the Meaford Museum, and it was a major boost to the museum to have this John Muir display. But the big question that I got into was, how did Muir get from Portage, where he was living in Wisconsin, to Bradford? Those are places where we knew where he left from, and we knew he got to Bradford, but there was nothing else that was ever written, because we believe his journals had been in the sawmill when it burned down. So the 2 years of his time in Canada were totally burnt up in that time period. So at the time of 1864, this was the Grand Trunk Railway as it existed. So he got as far as Bradford and got off, and we don't know why Muir got off in Bradford, Ontario, but he ended up living with a Scottish family, the Campbells, and they had 2 sons, but no father left on the farm. So John Muir just jumped in, became a really good field hand for this group of people. But they allowed him to go off and do his botanizing, which is really what he wanted to do. When I was starting to do this research in 2015, 2016, this book I discovered had come out a few years, well, 8 years earlier, and I had not known how much John Muir was a botanist. But this woman, Bonnie Gazelle, had gone all around the United States collecting all of the plant specimens that he had collected. And I've got out in the foyer some of my specimens that I've collected, and you'll see how they look after they've gone through a plant press or a drying process. So here's an image of John Muir as the botanist. Traveled on foot and carried his plant press. You can see it down in the right here. And he mostly lived on bread and tea when he was traveling. He was very poor, so that's all he could afford. This is my personal plant press made of cardboard and paper that gets all squished together, and the plants dry out in there and then they get dried. And there's some plants that are just getting into the process. And you can see there's a goldenrod there. And John Muir was very involved with plants, and he loved the goldenrod for some reason. And as you drive around now in our territory, you'll see how much goldenrod has really taken over in this area. When I talk about sleuthing and looking for clues, you can see in the bottom right corner here of these, there's labels. And all these plants were labeled for the date and location for where they were found. So the plant on the left is a goldenrod, and the one on the right is a Canadian violet. And these are both found in the Hockley Valley area. These plants look very dried and brown after the length of time they've been in museums. But one of the most important plants that Muir found was the Calypso borealis orchid, and it was found in Holland Marsh, just to the south of Bradford in 1864. And it doesn't look very exciting there, but when you see it in life, this is what it looks like. Tiny plant the size of your thumb, and the flower is the size of your thumbnail. This is just an extraordinary plant, and Muir in his final years was talking about this is one of the 3 most important things he had found in his life, which was this Calypso borealis, which he found in the Holland Marsh. I was determined that I would find a Calypso, and I was told that they existed in Bruce Peninsula National Park on Flower Pot Island, so I went up one early weekend in June and was able to get this photograph. So this is my photo. And I was lying on a log, my face was just inches away from this plant, and my eyes couldn't focus because it was such a small little plant. So I was really thankful that my lenses on my camera could do this kind of work for me. I went back to the Holland Marsh to see if I could find any area where there might still be calypso growing, and it's a real swamp now. They've raised the level of the water around the edges because, you know, if you've driven down Highway 400, it's been pumped out for farmland. And this is the route that Muir would have taken as he wandered in the spring of 1864. This is the Holland Marsh in this area over here, this big green area, and the Campbell Farm was right at the north edge. And these are the only roads that were open at the time, so he would have wandered to the west, would have got as far as Luther Marsh, back up to a little village called Mono Center, most likely up into Mono Cliffs, which is a beautiful area for the Bruce Trail, if you hike the Bruce Trail, and then back through this area. This was just a big spring wander he did, and he went back to the Campbells during harvest time and worked there all the way through July and August. This is the kind of road that he would have been walking on. This is actually the 5th line going directly west. And you can't quite see it, but right at the very top is the Niagara Escarpment, way off in the distance. So John Muir would have seen this high hill and knew that he wanted to get out to that place. And as I said, he walked through what is now Hockley Valley, and it was being opened up for farming at the time, but now it's gone totally back into forest, so it's a beautiful place to visit today. And these are just some of the pictures that I took because I wanted to not only talk the talk like I'm doing now, but I wanted to walk the walk. So I walked everywhere that John Muir walked on this whole summer of 1864. It took me 5 years to get through all of the various places and trying to be at a location when he had collected a plant on a certain date. That's actually the Bruce Trail as it goes through the Hockley Valley. The light was just pouring in beautifully. I can imagine John walking down through that glade. And I haven't seen salamanders for years, and I found one in the Hockley Valley, so that was just a real joy. When Muir was doing this spring walk, or all of his walks, as I said, he didn't have any money, so he just walked with his plant press and a little bit of food in his pocket. But at night, he'd go up to one of these, cabins where people were starting to do their settlement, and ask for food and a place to sleep for the night. And in exchange, he would work for a whole day for the people the next day. It turned out he was such a good entertainer that people wouldn't want him to leave, so he was having a hard time getting away from all of these lonely settlers who are deep in the woods. In the Hockley Valley at that time, it was 80% Irish people who were there, and this is right after the potato famine. And so this is a big monument that was made quite a bit later after they had some money, but one family came, the husband came from Donegal, and the wife came from Armagh, if you know those places in Ireland. The interesting thing is that these Irish people these new settlers had no money, they had no currency, so the barter system was alive and well. So it was really, John Muir fit right in, having no money himself and being an immigrant, a refugee as well. And down in Wisconsin, John Muir, where the family lived, they had a little church that they called the Wee White Kirk. Well, this is a wee white kirk that I found in southern Ontario, so I thought John Muir could have been quite happy, in this little church. He was very religious. He was brought up in the Presbyterian Church, a very strict sect of the church, and by the time he was a teenager, he had memorized the Bible, and he could quote it for chapter and verse for the rest of his life. As I mentioned, Mono Center was a place that was an important place at the time. It was on a military road between Toronto and Owen Sound, so there was a lot of movement through this particular village. But this is what's left of Mono Center now. The original general store is turned into a very nice, fancy restaurant. But across the street is Mono Cliffs Provincial Park, which is a stunning little park, just to the north of Orangeville. And when I was doing research in that area, people were saying, you should go and check out Jacob's Ladder. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. What's Jacob's Ladder all about? So I had to get led there because they're not allowing people to go to this site anymore. It's quite dangerous. And what it is if you remember your Bible stories, is that Jacob at one point had a dream that there was this ladder going to heaven on the glorious light with all the angels. And so when you climbed into this crevasse in Monocliffs Provincial Park, he got to the bottom and he looked back up. There was just this blinding white light of the daylight pouring in. So there were pictures from the 1800s of people going in here on a Sunday afternoon, and the women in big skirts and the men with shirt and tie, to experience Jacob's Ladder. I was doing my best to photograph flowers as I went through all these areas that Muir traveled. This was a plant that I didn't know. It turns out to be a thistle, a musk thistle, a very beautiful plant. Found this in the Luther Lake area. And we all know this as Jack in the Pulpit. I should call it maybe John in the Pulpit, because he got up to the pulpit a lot. And here's a map of southern Ontario, and you can see the blue line. Bradford is right there. So this was his spring wander or saunter. And then as the summer was getting on and the harvest was done, he was going to meet his brother down at the bottom here of the map in Hamilton, and then go over to Niagara Falls, because this was a really big thing, is to go and see this incredible falls, especially for these two farm boys from Wisconsin. So the purple line is the route that he took, basically going in a hurry, not sauntering, to get down to Hamilton to meet his brother, who came down from Meaford. He'd already spent a year working at a mill in Meaford. And as you travel through Ontario, you go through different belts of development. And one of the belts that is really important is the Scottish belt. And this is in Orangeville, on the main street of Orangeville, where the Scots stonemasons were building these beautiful buildings. So this building is still in operation as a restaurant, dates to 1863. Another plant that I found in the area, this was actually in the Forks of the Credit, if you know that area. This is called a walking fern, and you might know that the plant reaches out and plants the next plant, one of the tendrils, and moves out. So over decades, it walks across the landscape, and I thought this was very appropriate for John Muir. Another thistle, more of a contemporary thistle that we know about. But this is where things got really interesting. This is wild calla lily, and it was found in the Devil's Half Acre, 40 miles northeast of Hamilton on the escarpment. So I used some, what do they call, compasses to figure out where 40 miles would be. And it turns out that's Forks of the Credit area just south of Orangeville. So I went looking to try to find this plant during my hikes. I took hip waders, and I was going up and down all the river systems in the Forks of the Credit trying to find this plant. I could never find it. But what happened was that I talked to various people, and they say, well, maybe it grew up on the side of the escarpment somewhere, because where the soil was eroded and there was lots of boulders, maybe that's, the Devil's Half Acre, something that you couldn't farm. Found this on a plaque that in the Forks of the Credit, a place was called Brimstone, and I sort of thought of the devil and brimstone and all that fire stuff. I kept looking for that plant. What I did find was the actual remnants of the lime kiln up on the side of the escarpment, so it was a little discovery in this whole process. But a naturalist had told me that I should be looking in still water, not moving water. So this is a pond that I found on the side of the road at one place. And I decided I was going to go into this pond with my hip waders to find this calla lily. And it became an adventure. So I'm going to read this to you. So it goes on and on, but it's worth the read. So in August of 2018, on my second year of research of Muir's route, I was once again on the search for the wild calla lily in the Forks of the Credit. The area is a desirable weekend tourist destination for people from the urban parts of southern Ontario. There you can find a conservation area, a provincial park, excellent trout fishing, and a major hiking trail, the Bruce Trail, that passes through this valley. Because of this intense visitor pressure, all of the private land is completely fenced and posted with no trespassing signs. With these access issues, I knew it was going to be difficult to crack this dilemma of finding a quiet pond, let alone the elusive plant. On this trip, I had traveled down a gravel road that descended the south side of the Oak Ridges moraine into the Forks. Along this road, I spied an ideal location for aquatic plant hunting, a small duck pond of about 1 acre that abutted the road. This was great, a natural pond that I could access from the road and never have to confront a fence or a sign or an owner. I could see my goal of many floating aquatic plants just beyond the fringe of bulrushes hugging the shore. I duly suited up once again in hip waders and floundered off the road through the nearby scrubby brush and into the cattails. All was well until I was about 6 feet from shore, and then, as if in a weird science fiction movie, all the plants started to bow in towards my presence. Instantly, I realized that what was actually happening was I was slowly sinking. The plants which grew in a floating mat on the surface were leaning in on me. This is the worst case scenario of every fly fisherman's nightmare. I was sure that immediately I was going to break through that mat and plunge into the water, my hip waders filling and sinking me like a stone to the bottom of this innocuous little pond. Like a disgraced gangster with concrete overshoes, I would in desperation plunge through beneath the water, watching the mat close in over my head as the darkness enveloped me as I sank to the bottom and slowly drowned in a frenzied panic of disbelief. All of this happened in a millisecond of comprehension. No, no, no. I was not going to die in this stupid way, and violently threw myself onto my back and did an adrenaline-fueled backstroke through the cattails and brush. Thank you to those bushes and brush, or whatever it was. Thanks for the handhold. You were so tough and present when I needed you. I survived, obviously, with a pounding heart, and for minutes I was lying there in the ditch beside the road, realizing how close to death I had come. Much later, I discovered this quote from Hans Christian Andersen about a fairy story about a young princess fleeing from an evil king in the boglands of Denmark. The poor child was terrified, and she sprang away on the quaking quagmire where it would not bear any weight, much less hers. Big black bubbles rose, and these were the last trace of her. That's from The Marsh King's Daughter. I was very close to death that way, I thought. So I survived and carried on. And I found the wild calla lily 2 years later in a ditch. I could lean from my car and see the calla lily in a ditch. So you never know what's going to happen when you go out looking for plants. Carrying on with the Muir tour south, there's a road that some of you might know as a really good way of getting down to southern Ontario, which is Trafalgar Road. It was a very early settlement road, and I'm sure that Muir followed it from Orangeville down to Oakville and then over to Hamilton. But as he was going south, he would have seen the first signs of fall, as we're seeing now, and knowing that, okay, I've got to get down there, meet my brother, and then we'll see what happens next. The options for transportation at the time, of course, he's taken the train to Ontario, and bicycles were just invented around that time, but he never talked about getting on a bicycle. But horse and buggy were present everywhere, and so I'm sure that as he walked along these roads, if somebody came along in a horse and buggy, a horse and wagon, he would have jumped up and rode with the farmer. So basically, he was the very first hitchhiker in America. And if you read a book called My 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf, John Muir does talk about getting up and riding with a person way deep in the south of the United States. He got to Dundas, Ontario, where he was to meet his brother, and it was a pretty fancy place, as you can tell by the hotel and that very fancy carriage. And Hamilton, this is 1859, was a developing place, and it had all of its steel mills and foundries starting to work. So it was another, dirty, happening town. But one of the plants that he found on his 1 week of waiting in Hamilton was the honey locust tree. And I was determined that I was going to find this tree on September the 5th. So a few years back, I went to Hamilton on this day. And I didn't know what the tree looked like. So I went into the Royal Botanical Gardens along my route, just to the north edge of Hamilton, say, I'm looking for a honey locust tree. Do you know where I could find it? And they said, oh, sure. But what are you doing, actually? I said, well, I'm collecting plants that John Muir collected. He would have walked by the front of your establishment back in 1864. Well, this just blew them right out of the water because they have Canada's largest collection of pressed plants. So they took me in and showed me the laboratory where they have all of the plants that have been collected in Canada, the same way that John Muir was collecting plants back in his day. So I asked about the honey locust, and they said, sure, we've got them. They're down in our arboretum. You just have to walk down to the lakeside trail, and you can't miss them. So I'm pretty good at following directions, so I walked down this trail, and I walked back and forth on a very hot, humid day, and I was disgruntled that I couldn't find these trees. I sat down on a bench, and I saw this little stone sitting on the bench. It said trust, and there was a little heart. I turned it over, and it said God on the other side. I went, okay, am I going to trust God? Well, I sort of thought about it, put the stone back. I thought, somebody else needs this more than me. Until I looked down between my feet, and there was a pod of a honey locust between my feet. So I'm sure it wasn't there when I sat down. I looked up, and I was sitting in a grove, a huge grove of honey locust trees, and they are immense big trees. And it turns out this was a native village site going back 200 or 300 years. And honey locusts were traded like candy because they were so sweet. So after they'd had the sweetness from the seed, they would spit out the seed. And thus we have a honey locust forest these are like towering up to 150 feet high. So I was very happy that I didn't have to go swimming or almost die to find this. So I'm just going to grab a drink of water here. Hang on a second. Oh, this water is making me thirsty. So Muir would have liked to have gone to see the falls when it was in this pristine state, when it was pretty much first found by white Europeans. It had always been there, of course, in 1820. So he and his brother hiked over to Niagara Falls from Hamilton. Got to the lip of the falls, and you see these historic pictures, and you think, oh yeah, sepia tone. But John Muir would have seen this falls in color, and he would have climbed down into the gorge to see how close he could get and how much he could experience all this water. Because he came from a very dry and dusty place in Wisconsin, so here is this immense amount of water. He might have climbed down. I paid the money and took the elevator down and walked through the tunnel. You all know where this site is. So it was a little easier for me. But I also went down to the rapids just by the whirlpool, and all the water gets compressed. And these waves that you're seeing there are about 15 to 20 feet high. So it's just an amazing rapids to see. And once again, you can take an elevator down to see this rapids. The reason I put this picture in is that if Muir had gotten down to the bottom of the gorge, he would have seen all of that geology that's exposed. Later in his life, he became very interested in geology, and I believe that between the falls and the water and the geology of the limestone. I'm sorry, it's not limestone, it's dolostone. He would have gotten very interested in geology from this visit as well. The other thing too, if you go down to that part of Ontario, you move into what's called the Carolinian zone of vegetation. And the cardinal flower is one of the very impressive flowers that you will see. But as we're watching now outside, you know, fall is coming upon us very fast. And he and his brother decided it was time to head north. Danny, the brother, had already been working in Meaford for a year at the sawmill in the Trout Hollow. And so he convinced John that the best place for him to spend the winter was to come back up to Meaford. So they headed back up from Niagara Falls. The left purple line is where they went up. And the numbers you see on here are all the plants that he collected in different places. And there's a total of 149 plants that he collected in that summer of 1864. So he had a very good year of work for his botany. And these are the towns that as he walked north. He would have gone through Guelph, Fergus, Mount Forest, Durham, Owen Sound, and then across the top to Meaford and Trout Hollow. Those of us in Ontario know that Fergus is a very Scottish town, and when you look at this picture, and if you were in Dunbar right now, it's almost virtually the same kind of construction, big, you know, block buildings. So if it hadn't been for Danny dragging John Muir all the way up to Meaford, I'm sure Muir would have stopped in Fergus, and he wouldn't have ever made it back to the United States. Further north, they got into, you know, the trees, the larches turning yellow, and got into Georgian Bay on a rough day, rough cold day, and realized that they were in a very good place. So they hunkered down in Trout Hollow for the next winter, the next 2 winters for John Muir. And this is a picture of what Trout Hollow looks like in the wintertime. The river still runs through it at some times. And pretty much that is the story of how I did the Muir route all the way through. And I'm sure that John Muir in his old age would look back at his time in Meaford with very fond memories. One of the things that's happened down in Trout Hollow is recently it was been purchased or donated to the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy. So it's a land trust, and it will be in the public domain now forever. So I'm really happy that we've done that for John Muir. So, time to go out for a saunter. Thank you very much.
That was terrific.
A sip here.
You have a sip. Thank you very much. I'm astonished at the type of person who is so diligent to do this kind of thing, but I'm very grateful that he did it, because I was in Trout Hollow a couple of days ago. I had no idea what was going on and its history, so I do thank you for that, Robert. And I have a ton of questions, as I'm sure you do, and Robert has graciously offered to answer any, should you have them. You kind of did everything. I see one over here. Come on up and just repeat the question so we get it for the people from all over the world that you're describing.
I'm going to put my hat on just so I can, the light's in my face right now. Go ahead.
Well, I did not hear, oh, I'm sorry. Are you first? Thank you.
The lady?
I did not hear you mention about whether he was related to the Muir family that I saw lived just west of Ceylon, here on Highway 4. They had a name for a long time on the barn with the Scottish bagpiper, and there was a house, a bungalow beside it with a name on the mailbox. So how is that, is it related that way?
Okay, just for the people out there in the world, the question is, there's a farm nearby with the name Muir on it, and a great big bagpiper on it. When you go to Scotland and you ask somebody if they know about John Muir, and they say, "Oh, which John Muir are you talking about?" Because there's many John Muirs, and there are many, many Muirs. Both John and his brother Dan went back to the United States, so those Muirs are a different family. And here in Canada, there was another Muir by the name of Alexander Muir, who wrote a famous Canadian song, and what's it called? The Maple Leaf Forever. Do you remember that? That was another Scotsman who wrote that song. Does that work for you? Okay. Was there a question there?
What is the river that runs through the Trevally?
It's called the Big Head River. And there's lots of controversy about where that name came from, but if you know the concept of when you have a dam, and the higher the dam, the more head you have. And the Big Head River starts in Walters Falls at the top of the escarpment, so it descends very quickly. So they could have had many mills along that river in the early days. Yes? Okay. The question is, when he couldn't find a cabin to sleep in, he would just sleep wild, as they say in England or Scotland. Yeah, he would just sleep under a cedar tree, pull in some bracken ferns to create some insulation. And he was a very tough man, because he grew up in a very tough situation at his farm in Wisconsin. He was really worked hard. And when you read more about Muir, what he did in the Sierras of California is absolutely beyond belief. Some mountaineers can't even do what John Muir did without ropes or, safety gear. Does that answer the question, sort of? He slept on the ground, yeah. And, mosquitoes, bugs, whatever, he'd put up with it. So, yeah. Yes. Oh, there's another question here. Yes. I just want to speak a little bit more about the plaque. So when I got to see that plaque and realized that I wanted to do something about this plaque, that was in 1990, 91. I wouldn't know that this many years later, I'm standing in a church here telling you about John Muir, from that one little plaque. But it needed help to be cleaned up and rebronzed, as they say. But this is during the days of Mike Harris, so there was no money for little things like that. So I called down to the Archaeological Historic Sites Board, and they said, yeah, what you need to do is, if you could just bring that plaque down to us, that would be great. They couldn't afford to send somebody up to take the plaque off the post. So they said, get a friend and a stepladder and take some Allen keys and take it off and bring it down to us. So I did that and drove it to Toronto, and 2 months later I get a call, your plaque's ready. It was beautiful, but by that time the Conservation Authority were embarrassed that they had done nothing with that plaque for 40 years. So they relocated it up to where it is now. But the other thing that happened was that the Historical Sites Board provided all that signage that you see out there on County Road 7. So most people know about John Muir because they first see that sign on the side of the road. Then they go in and learn more. Okay. All right, thank you. That was good.
You're not going to find me sleeping in a ditch on the side of the road. I'm sure a lot of you know Jane Gibson, Barry Penhill. They couldn't be here tonight. But their stalwarts, Steve and Catherine Plenner, are here. And they have a basket with things in it. They're going to do a draw now. We have 3 draws. It's the tradition of the Friends of the Museum to have a draw. I'm going to get Steve to do the first one. No, he was going to do the last one, but now you're going to do them all. Come on, step up.
Okay, the first one.
The first book is Permission Granted by Squadron Leader Wes McIntosh, and it is the history of his training of pilots in the Second War. And the winner is?
2681. Do we have a winner out there? Yep.
Look at you, that is well done.
Okay.
There's a beautiful book of poetry here. It's called The Gift of Country Life by Victor Carl Friesen. And it's memories of farming in the 1940s. And there are some beautiful poems in here. I got a chance to have a look at it briefly. So now you're going to win it.
The next one is 2676.
There you go. Then there's another book. Yeah, it's another one. Oh, yeah, it's called My Summer of Glorious Freedom. John Muir's Saunter. Robert Burcher. Okay. Who wins this?
That's the comedy part of the show, folks. 2668 wins the book.
Phooey, I wanted it. Oh, wow. Congratulations. Well, we're done, right? We're done. Well, John, thank you so much for coming. And look, I just called him John Muir. It's getting late. Thank you all for coming. And I'm going to thank all our sponsors here. Good old Highland Grounds. They're at every event ever around here, coming up for free. He'll be back to take all this stuff away tonight. Much appreciated. Artemisa Cheese, good old Steve's Restaurant, and Brilliant Bread, and Steve and Catherine Plenner, who do all the work to make this happen tonight, as well as the titan of technology that you can't see up in the gods, Tim Riley. So thanks, everybody. Make sure that you come back Thursday, October the 16th. Franco Mariotti's here, and he's going to talk about the Northwest Passage, its history, and its melting. I wouldn't miss it. Thanks again. Have a good evening.